Hello there. Today, as promised, we'll talk about how to select training loads. As it is often the case with my videos, you're going to find that it's actually quite simple and not nearly as complicated as many coaches and therapists make it out to be. Let's head right into it. Here's how proper, efficient load selection process looks like. On your first training session, you familiarize yourself with the exercises, the lifts, you practice proper technique. While doing that, you're increasing the weight depending on how good your form is, until the coach, with his experienced coaching eye, decides that a further increase in weight at this moment would probably result in form breakdown. You stop at that weight and perform your first proper training sets with it. If you don't have a coach, just stop at a weight with which you can confidently perform a complete set. Usually it will be a set of 5 reps with good form. If it ends up being somewhat below your capacity, that's not a big problem, because as you'll be increasing the load on consecutive sessions, you'll eventually catch up to your true limit effort. So in other words, you find the heaviest or close to the heaviest load with which you can maintain proper form throughout a complete set, and that becomes your starting point. From that starting point, you're going to be increasing the weight incrementally, usually session to session. How big the increases should be. That will depend on the exercise as well as what sort of trainee we're dealing with. On the exercises in which you use the heaviest weights, squats and deadlifts, you'll be making bigger jumps like 5 pounds a workout. On the bench press and the press, which are done with lighter weights, 2.5 pound jumps may be more appropriate, for example. If you're a 25-year-old, healthy athletic guy with good genetics for sports, you may be able to make even 10-pound jumps on the squat, while your frail grandmother may need as small as 1-pound jumps on her squats. There really isn't a fixed formula for this. You just have to figure out how big of an increase you can handle. If you're unsure about this, it's generally better to make a smaller increase than to load too much on the bar and fail. Even if you played it safe, as long as you keep making those increases, you'll eventually catch up to your actual limit effort. So in other words, you increase the load incrementally from your starting point, session to session, and the increases should be as big as you can handle, so you don't leave gains on the table. You follow that process for as long as it works. You stick to your 5 rep sets and select your training load based on your previous workout. You don't need to change your rep ranges. You don't ever need to calculate percentages of your 1 rep max. As a novice, you can't objectively establish or calculate your 1 rep max anyway. And you definitely don't need something like RPE training, which stands for rating of perceived exertion, which makes you select your training loads based on your subjective perception. Training is a process which should remain very objective. What you need to select the training load for a given workout is the number from the previous workout and a decision on how big of an increase you should make. Now, what I described is called a novice linear progression. And yes, as its name suggests, it is appropriate for novice lifters. So you may think that I'm simplifying the issue by focusing just on that group. Well, firstly, as you may remember, in the last video, I've explained how the vast majority of trainees are in fact objectively novices, and most of them won't ever need to hear more complex advice than this. And secondly, even though training for intermediate and advanced lifters does become increasingly more complex, and this I also pointed out in the last video, you still don't really need more complex methods of selecting loads. It still comes down to looking up your numbers from the previous training sessions and deciding where to go from there. It's just going to be a little more tricky. Advanced training programming is beyond the scope of this video, but let me just give you a few simple examples of how a more advanced lifter may be modifying his training parameters and selecting the loads. Once increasing the weight in a simple linear fashion stops working, what you can do is, for example, start alternating sessions of sets of 5 and sessions of sets of 3. You're already used to 5, so all you have to do is add a bit of weight for triples. Let's say somewhere between 5 and 10% of your 5 rep weight. If you're currently doing, let's say, 300 pounds for 3 sets of 5, put something like 315 or 320 for 3 sets of 3. And then you progress within those sessions independently. Another possible approach would be to start doing something like heavy light sessions, which again you would alternate. Using again 300 pounds as an example of your current weight for sets of 5, let's say on the next session you put something like 305 or 310 on the bar, but you do only one set of 5. So you start looking at your 3 sets of 5 workout as your light session, and 1 set of 5 with slightly heavier weight becomes your heavy session. Those are just few very simple examples, but you can see that at no point any complex calculations are necessary. You could use some if you wanted, but there is no point. Remember that for training to be effective, it ought to be as simple as possible for as long as possible. At the end of the day, whether you're a novice or a true advanced lifter, it all comes down to you making objective, measurable progress over time. Progress measured by the weight on the bar. To select the weight correctly, all you generally need is data from your previous training sessions and a little bit of thinking, depending on how advanced you are. It really hardly ever is more complicated than that. Don't look for some fancy methods of weight selection just because their complexity makes them look smart. Keep it simple. Just put a few more pounds on the bar than you lifted last time. I know it's hard. In fact, in the near future, we'll talk about why people generally don't want to do simple progression and instead look into different gimmicky methods. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to stay tuned. Also check out the Facebook fan page, linked in the description. Stay strong, and until next time.